This is Her Impact with Cassandra Hileos. Welcome back. And today we're going to talk about the five deadliest pandemics of all time. Now, we all live in really strange times with the latest pandemic we are experiencing, coronavirus. And we are so scared of tomorrow. We don't know what will happen. And we live with the consequence and the impacts of this pandemic economically, our health. So many people died. So many things change in our lives, and they will change in the future. But it's good to be optimistic, and it's good to know that we have survived so much worse with other pandemics we had in the past. And that's why we're going to talk about the five deadliest pandemics by chronological order. So the first is the Justinian plague that started in Egypt and traveled to Constantinople, which was the capital of Byzantine Empire, in 541 AD. So that traveled to Byzantine Empire, and because of the Emperor Justinian back then, that's why it was called the Plague of Justinian. So they came by fleas, which were, of course, they have plague on them, and the fleas travel on the black rats that were on grain that travel with the ships. So it just spread all over Europe, Asia, North America, Arabia, killing about 30 to 50 million people. Doing that, and perhaps half of the world population back then. So that was the fourth deadliest pandemic on these chronological order pandemics. So it believes that this pandemic is the first significant appearance of the bubonic plague, and that plague actually survived for centuries, and that's why we have the next pandemic in 1350, which is called the Black Death. So it's the same illness, the plague again, but this time it killed 200 million people, which is believed like about, I don't know, half of the population back then. So the Black Death is the deadliest of all pandemic. It's number one, and is of course this next outbreak of the bubonic plague started possibly in Asia, and they move in the West because of the caravans. So I went to Italy and arrived in the port of Messina in Sicily, and just spread through the whole Europe. So it was a lot of deaths back then. The bodies just went on the street, just dropped in the street, rotting on the ground, and just that's the same picture a lot of cities back then. So that plague was a lot of deaths, as you understand. And so England and France called truce of their war. Imagine that significant impacts they have this plague, because so many people died. So the economic, of course, system collapsed. The Vikings lost the strength to battle against a native population, and a lot of things in their lives back then stopped because of the disease. So actually, this pandemic is very important because they discover that they tested, actually they didn't discover, they didn't know how to control it, but they tested what we call now, of course, quarantine. So it started from this pandemic, And it started in Venice, which some officials back then they say that their newly arrived sailors they were going to put them in isolation, and they were going to take them out when the people were not sick anymore. So they put them in 30 days of quarantine until they stop being sick, and that's was started the quarantine from Quarantino in Italian. Now, then the next big pandemic is the smallpox, and it was about 1520. Is the second deadliest pandemic, and it lasted for centuries until 18th, 19th century. So as it started to be endemic in Europe, Asia, and Arabia for centuries, but it was just kill 3 out of 10 people that they were infected. It was just so epidemic, so strong. So the native population of the New World were not so much were worse. So when the virus arrived from the Europe because of the explorer in Native Americans, the indigenous people just got the disease and died. Like in Mexico, United States, they had zero immunity to smallpox. So they killed just tens of millions of native people. And is the first virus epidemic to be ended by a vaccine. So, and that was significant. Smallpox was cured because of a vaccine. But it lasted until the late 18th century, which they found the vaccine by a British doctor. And he just tested in his 9-year-old son, and it survived, and that's why they found the vaccine back then. Now, in 1918, it was the Spanish flu, and it was the third deadliest pandemic of all time. It killed like 50 million deaths worldwide. And because firstly it was observed in Europe and then in United States and some parts of Asia. So there's no available drugs or vaccines. Nothing can kill it, the flu. And because of the outbreak in Madrid in the spring led to a pandemic, that's why it was called Spanish flu. So, but until 1918, the flu had disappeared in the summer because people just started to develop immunities or just die. And that's why the Spanish flu ended. And the last pandemic, deadliest pandemic, which is the fifth deadliest pandemic, is the pandemic of AIDS in 1981. That's how we first saw it. And AIDS, as you may know, it destroys your immune system and eventually it kills you because the body cannot fight anymore. So people that got HIV virus, they have fever, headache, and these symptoms they had infectious through blood and other fluids, and the disease destroy your T cell. So this is how you die. So it was firstly observed in the American gay communities, but they believe that it was firstly developed by a chimpanzee virus from Africa in 1920, and it changed to AIDS, let's say. So it traveled from Africa to Haiti in 1960s, and then to America, New York, San Francisco in 1970s. So we know there's no treatment for AIDS, and it killed until now 35 million people. And and hopefully in the future we'll have the cure. But until now, we only can slow the progress of the disease. That's until now. So these five diseases are the five deadliest pandemics. And that's why we have hope for this pandemic, which is much less deadly. And hopefully the vaccines, it will be close, so we have some closure with this pandemic and we just move on. Our lives were going to change for sure, but we can move on with our lives. And that's the end of this episode. Make science your superpower, and I'll see you next time with another episode.